6. Kurt von Hammerstein-Eckwart. In 1930, Kurt von Hammerstein-Eckwart took over the Weimar Republic's armed forces as the commander-in-chief, otherwise known as the Reichswehr. He harbored unusually liberal views for a German military general during that time period, and was particularly against extremism. Hammerstein strongly and openly opposed Hitler, and spent the later portion of his military career trying to stop the dictator's rise to power. In 1932, he warned Hitler that in the event of a Nazi-led coup, he would order his troops to shoot on sight. It eventually became clear to Hammerstein that he was in a losing battle while trying to stop Hitler's leadership. He officially resigned from his post in 1934. 5 years later, he was briefly called back to military service. During that time, Hammerstein repeatedly tried baiting Hitler to his base in Cologne, with plans for the Führer to experience a sudden, tragic accident during his visit. But Hitler was well aware of Hammerstein's true intentions and declined his many invitations. He eventually relieved Hammerstein from his post for his negative attitude towards National Socialism. Being forced into retirement wasn't the worst punishment imaginable, considering how almost everyone who openly opposed Hitler was killed. And it gave Hammerstein more time to dedicate toward building up the German resistance. He was involved in multiple plots to overthrow and assassinate Hitler, none of which worked. Hammerstein's children also played a role in the resistance. He gave his daughter the names of Jews who were slated for arrest or deportation so she could warn them or help them hide. After his death, Hammerstein's sons participated in another assassination attempt against Hitler that famously became known as Operation Valkyrie. The former general died thanks to throat cancer in 1943. His family declined a Nazi funeral and accidentally left a condolence wreath from Hitler on a subway in Berlin, conveniently letting them avoid displaying it at their service. Hammerstein's widow and 2 youngest children were sent to a concentration camp after the Valkyrie plot fell through. Luckily, they survived and were freed during the Allied liberation of the camps in 1945. Most people would have been murdered if they spoke out against Hitler as openly as Hammerstein did. Why do you think the dictator chose not to have him killed? Let me know what you think in the comments down below, but first, be sure to subscribe. 5. Henning Von Treskow. Major General Henning Von Treskow's military career officially started during World War I. Like most Germans, he opposed the Treaty of Versailles, which heavily blamed Germany for the conflict. Also, like many Germans, Treskow supported Adolf Hitler during his early rise to power. At a time when the country lacked necessary strong leadership and was in economic peril, Hitler seemed like the perfect antidote to all of Germany's problems. He promised to restore the failing nation's power and prosperity, and basically waved his middle finger at the Versailles Treaty. But after learning about the violence being inflicted against millions of Jews at Hitler's command, Treskow's feelings about the new leader changed quickly. He was also outraged when Hitler falsely accused a high-ranking officer of being gay just to get him removed from his position. The dictator also blackmailed another officer into resigning by threatening to expose his wife's illicit criminal past to the general public. In 1938, Treskow started seeking out civilians and fellow military officers who opposed Hitler in hopes of putting a plan together to assassinate the leader. He felt a moral obligation to fight against the Nazi regime and, in his words, shoot Hitler down like a rabid dog. Treskow became even more determined to destroy the man as senseless killing and violence against Jews, prisoners of war, civilians in occupied countries, and others continued and worsened. While closely following the philosophy of keeping one's friends close and their enemies closer, he stayed in the army, hoping to sabotage the Führer from within his ranks. His first attempt on Hitler's life came in 1943. When Hitler and his entourage traveled to Treskow's post in Smolensk. Under the direction of a fellow resistance member named Lieutenant General Friedrich Olbricht, Treskow and several other officers planned to shoot at Hitler at the same time, after getting a special signal. The plan was called off at the last minute because some high-ranking resistance members thought it was too early for an assassination attempt, without unknowingly causing even bigger problems, like a possible civil war. But Treskow had other ideas. He wanted Hitler dead and gone as soon as possible. He also thought there was no better time than the present to make it happen. As Hitler's group prepared to go back to Berlin, Treskow approached them, asking a staff member to deliver a package containing Cointreau brandy. The staff obliged, completely unaware that the parcel was rigged with explosives connected to a 30-minute timer. Treskow was extremely disappointed when he got word that the plane touched down safely. The device had malfunctioned, likely due to the extremely low temperatures in the plane's luggage compartment. Treskow later orchestrated several more attempts on Hitler's life, including the famously failed and previously mentioned Operation Valkyrie plot in 1944. In most cases, Treskow's plans failed thanks to Hitler's irregular and unpredictable habits, which made it difficult to properly time a successful assassination attempt, and because Hitler started to spend most of his time hiding in bunkers as the war progressed. Treskow made the decision to take his own life after Operation Valkyrie failed, likely knowing he would be killed if he didn't. 4. Fritz Dietloff von der Schulenburg. As a member of a prominent Prussian noble family and the son of a famous World War I general, Fritz Dietloff von der Schulenburg was the type of person Hitler wanted on his side. Schulenburg decided to join the Nazi Party in 1932, around the same time the rest of his family did. He quickly became a high-ranking government official while playing an imperative role in organizing the Nazis' organizational structure. Schulenburg was thrilled when Hitler became chancellor in 1933. He had many things in common with the up-and-coming dictator, including a strong sense of nationalism, anti-Semitic views, and a deep disdain for the Catholic Church. That same year, Schulenburg was appointed to the government council in Königsberg. His position aimed to establish the forced coordination of social groups under a Nazi policy known as Gleichschaltung, and to delegate jobs to Nazi party members. Schulenburg gained decent influence as a government official, but he struggled to get along with the regional leader of his party, Erich Koch. So he requested a transfer and became the district administrator of a small town called Fischhausen. But he apparently didn't travel far enough away from Koch, and their disagreements continued at the new location. A lucky break came for Schulenburg in 1937, when the German Interior Ministry promoted him to be the vice president of police in Berlin. It was during this time that he started to question his unwavering loyalty to Hitler. The Nazis eventually viewed him as untrustworthy, and in 1940, he was kicked out of the party for good. He decided to volunteer for military service after this, and became the commander of an elite infantry regiment. That same year, he joined a group of anti-Nazi intellectuals called the Kreisau Circle. They didn't plot directly against the regime, but they believed it was inevitably going to crash and burn. Together, they discussed their vision for the country's future. Schulenburg had other ideas though, and started plotting with a fellow member named Eugen Gerstenmaier to speed up the Third Reich's end. The men made a plan to shoot Hitler during a parade in Paris, but the Führer changed his plans last minute, deciding not to go to the event. In the next few years after that, Schulenburg played an imperative role in the planning of Operation Valkyrie. When it didn't go well, he was arrested after the failed assassination and was executed a few weeks later, after a short trial. How do you think the course of history would have changed if any of the assassination attempts against Hitler had succeeded? Let me know in the comments below, but first be sure to subscribe. 3. Rudolph Christoph von Gerstorff. After being born and raised in a noble Silesian military family, it was only natural that Rudolph Christoph von Gerstorff followed in his father's footsteps. He joined the German army in 1923 at the age of 18 and eventually became a career officer. During the outset of World War II in 1939, he took part in the Nazi invasion of Poland as well as the Battle of France. Gerstorff became a counterintelligence officer just 2 years later in 1941. During this time, he learned about some of the atrocities being committed against the Jewish people and Soviet prisoners of war by paramilitary death squads. He became close friends with another military officer named Henning Von Treskow, who we discussed earlier, and was also a member of the German resistance against the Nazis. After Treskow's plan to bomb Hitler's private plane failed in 1943, Gerstorff said he was ready to do whatever it took to kill the dictator, even if it meant sacrificing his life. He knew Hitler had plans to visit the Zeighaus Berlin Armory to pay his respects to fallen soldiers during the upcoming Heldengedenktag holiday. Hitler would likely spend a decent amount of time at the site, where Gerstorff was supposed to act as his assigned guide. It would be the perfect opportunity to carry out an assassination plot. When the day finally came, Gerstorff put several explosives in his pocket and set them on a 10-minute timer, with plans to hug Hitler right during the blast, ensuring the dictator's death. Ideally, the explosion would also kill Hitler's top officials who were planning to join him that day, including Heinrich Himmler, Hermann Göring, Wilhelm Keitel, and Karl Donitz. Much to Gerstorff's shock, the group's visit to the armory was extremely short and very rushed. They were in and out before the 10-minute timer had time to detonate the bomb. Luckily, Gerstorff disarmed the explosive in time to avoid the blast. He was one of very few assassination plotters to survive the war, thanks largely to the loyalty of his co-conspirators. 2. Helmut Stief. From 1922 to 1933, Helmut Stief served in the Abwehr, a military intelligence organization operating under the Weimar Republic's German armed forces, called the Reichswehr. When Hitler first rose to power, he joined the Wehrmacht General Staff, where he became recognized for his organizational skills. Stief was later promoted to chief of the organizational department of the Abwehr. For whatever reason, Hitler strongly disliked Stief. He publicly referred to the young general as a poisonous little dwarf. Because of this, Stief wasn't exactly Hitler's biggest fan. While serving in the German invasion of Poland in 1939 and seeing firsthand how Hitler conducted war, he developed a severe disdain for the dictator. In a letter to his wife, he described the man as a tool of a despotic will to destroy without regard for humanity and simple decency. Due to his high-ranking position, Stief had easy access to multiple explosives, so he started to build up a personal stockpile. He provided the weapons for Nazi officer Axel von dem Busch's assassination attempt against Hitler, which ended up being cancelled. Stief also volunteered to sacrifice his own life for an assassination, but backed out multiple times. He helped plan Operation Valkyrie and flew to Hitler's bunker in Poland the day of the planned hit. But Hitler survived, and Stief was among the dozens of planners who were executed just weeks later. 1. The July Plot, Operation Valkyrie. Out of over 40 known attempts on Hitler's life, the July Plot is by far the most famous, also referred to as Operation Valkyrie. The highly coordinated plan involved around 200 members of the German resistance. Most of them had been previously loyal to Hitler and came from privileged, aristocratic, or high-ranking military backgrounds. Experts believed that in most cases, a resistance member's change of heart about the dictator was not based on his murderous and genocidal ways. In fact, many members of the resistance still harbored anti-Semitic and other hateful views that were strikingly similar to Hitler's. The vast majority of those involved in Valkyrie turned against Hitler because they hadn't predicted that he would turn into a dictator. Hitler rose to power with most of the German people's support. He didn't just take it single-handedly, but once he had it, he started imprisoning and killing people who spoke out against him, giving himself unchecked power. It wasn't what people initially envisioned when they chose to support him. And when Germany began losing the war, they had even less reason to vouch for Hitler. Some of the Valkyrie plotters did have strong moral convictions against the genocides committed by Hitler. And for a few, it was their main reason for joining the movement. The resistance members held many differing viewpoints, but they all despised the Nazi tyrant enough to work together and try to kill him. On July 20th, 1944, Klaus von Stauffenberg snuck into Hitler's top-secret Wolf's Lair bunker in Poland with a briefcase full of explosives. He then said he needed to make a phone call and left the room. Instead, Stauffenberg flew back to Berlin without sticking around to ensure that Hitler was dead. He wanted to start plotting the next step of the operation, an uprising to overthrow the Nazi regime. The blast from the bomb killed 3 officers and a stenographer, but Hitler came out of the explosion practically unscathed. When word of his survival reached Berlin, one of Stauffenberg's co-conspirators turned him in, and he was executed by firing squad. Nearly all 200 of the plotters were executed. The handful of survivors were initially seen as traitors, but were eventually called heroes. Thanks for watching. Have you heard of any of these men before? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.